All right, Lord, we thank you for this time, for this evening. We ask that you would bless your word as we dive into it. I ask, Lord, in Jesus' name, that it would be your spirit and your work, your heart, your will. I pray, Lord, I request that you would really speak to hearts here tonight, Lord, that you would strengthen and not tear down. I know that's your heart. I know that's really the heart of this passage. I just pray, Lord, that you would bring edification and comfort and exhortation to your church. In Jesus' name, amen. So, as we talked about last week, we got to verse 20, I think-ish. No, we got to verse 16. Thank you. I'd lined these differently. And we got to the point where verse 16... verse 10, obviously, the chapter changes, and it's important to remember, ladies, that this is coming from a lady. But in the same way that it's coming from a lady, it's also, some people, like J.B. Phillips, treats this passage as a description of a real woman. He actually believes Solomon here is actually describing the Shulamite that he lost in the Song of Solomon, though I kind of don't agree with that because I don't see that in the Song of Solomon, that Solomon and the Shulamite did not end up together. And I also am not really so certain that I think this is a description of an actual, necessarily a description of a specific woman that Solomon was thinking about. Possibly, maybe not. I will say this, for the girls here, I've heard numerous times from numerous different girls that Proverbs 31 can actually be discouraging to them. And I think Proverbs 31 is exactly, in some ways, it's the female equivalent of the church equivalent of Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Matthew 5, 6, and 7 are the Sermon on the Mount. And I don't know if you guys have ever read Matthew 5 in particular and come across the verses where it says, like in verse 48, therefore you shall be perfect. Nate, what does 5:48 say? Matthew 5:48? I know you know this verse.
I know it. It says, and Jesus said to them, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect.
I knew you knew that verse because we've talked about it.
Yes, sir.
And so reading Matthew 5, there are verses like that talk about perfection. Now, if you know the scriptures, you know that word for perfect there, it actually can and is often translated mature, complete, or of full age. And this idea here of the perfect woman, I think it's very important that you understand, ladies, as we again dive back into it, that this is like the culmination of the perfect woman. This isn't the woman necessarily, I don't believe, that it's the woman that God is measuring you against when you're 20. I just don't believe that. I think this is the ideal woman. It's the idea of this is the direction God is taking you in the process of maturity that He is working in your life. It's not so much His expectation for you now, even though it obviously is that sort of silhouette of what you obviously strive to be like. I don't think, personally, that the intent of the passage from the throne room of God is to discourage women. I think it's the idea of this is where I'm taking you as a woman. This is the process of maturity. And if you start looking at it and going, dude, I'm not there yet, and you start getting down on yourself, I personally think you're missing the point. That's really not the point. So, to quote the Apostle Peter in his epistle, writing there to the church, he said, I'm writing to stir up your pure minds by way of reminder. Take it in that heart. I really think that's the intention. So, who can find a virtuous wife? Her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. Now, I break up the section into, I had them numbered. I thought I had them numbered. Oh, I do have them numbered. Into 6 sections. And we've already looked at the first one, which is her integrity. That's verses 11 and 12. The question is verse 10. 11 and 12 are her integrity. 13 through 16 are her vocation. Her vocation. 17 through 20 are her ministry. And I think, honestly, that if you take the notes I've made here, and I've borrowed some of these, you'll really see that it does actually kind of break up this way, this chapter. So again, section 3, her ministry, verses 17 through 20. Verses 21 through 24 is her household, 21 through 24. 25 through 27 is her character. Her character. And then 28 through 31 is her glory. So her integrity, her vocation, her ministry, her household, her character, her glory. Her integrity, again, is verses 11 and 12. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. We already looked at that. Verses 13 through 16, her vocation. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings her food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night. and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. I think something startling about this, I have to reiterate it, is that this is extremely insane that she provides for the maidservants, because the maidservants should be providing for her. And it's sort of a female typology of Jesus there. She considers a field and buys it, and from her profits she plants a vineyard. And so that's where we got to last week. So picking up in the third section, her ministry, verses 17 through 20. So, verses 17 through 20. I break these 4 verses into 4 different points. Her ministry, first and foremost, as we read verse 17, please catch this interesting truth. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. Now, the second statement is talking about an increase in strength in her own arms. It's talking about a strength, essentially, that is hers. The first comment, though, interestingly enough, if you meditate on it, you're going to come to the conclusion that she's girding herself, and when you gird something, you're placing it upon it. It's actually not her strength. And this ties in with this idea of these 4 verses dealing with her ministry, because ministry, as you all are, I think, probably well aware, is not intended to be undertaken in your own strength. We are to, obviously, not only face life in God's strength, but also, more than anything else in life, you are to face the ministry that God has placed or will place in front of you in His strength. So we see the interesting paradox here, though, of the passage, and it's a paradox, sort of a paradox carried throughout the New Testament, this idea that she girds herself with strength. The woman of God, for the ministry in front of her, she girds herself with a strength that is not her own. But she does strengthen her own arms, and in that we find the paradox that's really conveyed in Colossians 1:29. I'd encourage you to write that down and maybe look at it later, guys and girls. This verse is a very important verse, actually, in the concept of grace and how grace works. Colossians 1:29. To this end I also labor, striving according to His working, which works in me mightily. To this end, the end of preaching Christ and winning the lost, Paul said, to this end I strive according to, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's what it means, I strive according to the grace that works in me. I strive according to the strength that works in me. And in this verse, we find that interesting paradox where God's strength and our strength meet, where God's will, God's sovereignty in a way, and man's free will meet. There is an interchange there. There is this place where we don't even necessarily know where it meets, where God said to the man with the withered hand, stretch out your hand, and it was as he stretched out his hand that it was healed. At what point did it start healing? I don't know. But it was after he started stretching it out, and it was while he was stretching it out that it was healed. And the truth about God's strength working in us is that, yes, it's grace. Yes, we come to Him for His strength. But some Christians then take that to laziness and be like, all right, well, God will give me strength, and then they lay around. And that wasn't what the Apostle Paul knew. The Apostle Paul here says, I strive according to the grace, according to the strength that works in me. And so I see that here, that it's very reminiscent of Colossians 1:29 here in Proverbs 31, verse 17. She girds herself with strength, and I would say to you that it's a strength that is not her own. She girds herself with strength and strengthens her arms. So, the 4 verses here, 17, 18, 19, and 20, I have them titled as His strength, His approval, His heart, and His methods. His strength, His approval, His heart, and His methods. Not her husband's, God's. So her ministry, looking at these, we've obviously already kind of talked about verse 17. It's his strength. She girds herself with his strength, but she also strengthens her arms. She strives according to the grace that works in her. His strength. Verse 18, his approval. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. His approval. How does she perceive that her merchandise is good? Does she perceive that her merchandise is good because she's filled up with self-esteem? I don't think so. I think self-esteem is contrary to godly spirituality. Self-esteem actually will lead to all kinds of horrible things. Self-esteem is a pathway to the flesh and to a life in the flesh. So it's not self-esteem here. Where does she get this realization and this perspective on her life and on what she's doing with her life, that she looks at her life and perceives that her merchandise is good? I believe it's through God's approval. I believe it's obviously through this perspective that's not her own. She perceives that her merchandise is good. And this is a reality about walking with the Lord. The closer you walk with the Lord, you have that confirmation in your spirit when you're walking closely with the Lord, and you know that you're walking in lockstep. A man or a woman can look at their life and perceive that what's going on in their life, when they're walking in lockstep with the Lord and they're abiding in Him and under the shadow of His wing, and they're in that close intimacy, you have that confidence that the Apostle Peter talked about in his epistle. You have that confidence in your heart that you know that your merchandise is good. And this is important, though. And it's again, one of these spiritual truths that in some ways it looks like self-esteem, and so it gets mistaken for self-esteem, and it's not. But I just want to say, ladies, in marriage, it is important that you be able to perceive that your merchandise is good. It is a problem in marriage, either the man or the woman, if the man or the woman is kind of caught up in a sort of a shame spiral, or in a sort of a fearful, doubting mentality where they're always just unsettled in their heart. They don't know that things are right with them in the Lord, and they don't know that they're walking in lockstep with the Lord. It really causes a lot of problems in marriage. In the family, really brings about really bad effects in children when one of the parents, and it's one of the main problems I think in our day and age, is that children are being raised by parents that are a mess. I don't know if you've experienced that, but it's a big problem with it's a big part of why the culture is where it is at now, is that children are raised by parents who are not strong. Parents who are not confident, parents who are an absolute mess in their emotional life and in their mind, and it really causes all kinds of problems in children. So she perceives that her merchandise is good, and her lamp does not go out by night. Now, as I said last week, I'm going to attempt to avoid talking about Alicia as much as possible. I did a decent job of it last week, though I had to talk a lot about my mom too. I apologize for that. I'm, again, going to attempt to avoid talking about Alicia as much as possible. But as I said last week, I have been blessed in my life to have had the two closest women in my life be incredibly strong, godly women. And I'm very blessed, and I cannot read Proverbs 31 without practically every verse something reminding me of Alicia and or my mom. But this one in particular, her lamp does not go out by night. This one reminds me of Alicia, because Alicia is so willing, has always been very willing, having counted the cost of being a pastor's wife before we got married, to leave the light on at night. I think of the time, I'm not going to say anybody's name, though a lot of you know who this person is. I think about the time that one of the high school boys showed up at our doorstep at 3:15 in the morning in his underwear one night.
and I pulled a gun on him. But that really happened, and I think about the fact how Alicia immediately wasn't freaked out and wasn't like, tell him to get out of here. She went and got blankets and got some clothes for him, and I think about my wife with this. When I think about this verse here where it says her lamp does not go out by night, I think about all the times that over the years that she has been perfectly willing, as a lot of women I've met would not be willing to open our doors to someone that needs counseling, even if it's 9, 10, 11, 12 p.m. at night. I think about how many times she has freed me, not only in saying, yes, you can meet with this person, yes, you can have this person or these people over, but that she does it willingly and with a joyful heart. Because saying it in an unwilling way really doesn't do somebody a lot of good. It's kind of hard to freely minister to somebody or some people when in the back of your mind you're thinking, my wife is ticked off right now. It makes it really, really difficult. And this verse reminds me of that. But this idea of her ministry, his strength, his approval, his heart. Verse 19, his heart. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hand holds the spindle. I'm not going to talk about Alicia the whole time, but I have to talk about her here again now. One of the things that I love about my wife is that she doesn't see social status. You guys know me. I've talked ad nauseum about this idea of youth pastors and youth leaders reaching out to the cool kids and things like that. One of the things over the years that has given me great joy on a regular basis is to see my wife have complete blinders on when girls walk into the youth group. She's not trying to relive her teenage years as she was the cool girl. She's not trying to do that. She doesn't see it. She only sees people. And she, in a lot of ways, one of the things I love about her is she really has her father's heart, her earthly father's heart, which is very similar to her heavenly father's heart, because she really has a heart for people who are broken. She really has a heart to reach out to people and to do those things, and I love that. And this is his heart. This is the Father's heart, stretching out our hands to the distaff. I can't look at this word without thinking of another place that the word is used. It's the same word that's used of the men who gathered around David, those who were uncontent and were grumbling and complaining. And I don't know if you ever thought about that, but it wasn't really the sort of pastoral search committee that would go on today at a mega church where they try and find the absolute best candidates with the best pedigree and attitude. Like, the men who gathered around David when he was being chased by Saul were all of the weary, discontented, the distaff, and those people. Those are the people that God turned into mighty soldiers. She extends her hand to the poor. This is verse 20, and we see here his methods, the Father's methods. She extends her hand to the poor. Yes, she reaches out her hands to the needy. One point I want to make here, the reason I see it as God's methods, his methods, is because it says here, I think it's of note, talking about the poor and the needy, that she reaches out her hands, not she hands out money. And there's a big difference. I'm not saying there's not a time to hand out money. There is. There's certainly time to give people money and to provide physically for their needs. That's absolutely true. Interestingly enough, though, I think it's of note that it says that she reaches out her hand here to the poor and needy. Because to be quite honest, it's really easy to give money. It's a lot harder to reach your hand out and take somebody's hand. Verses 21 through 24, we're going to see the fourth section, her household. Her household is prepared, provided for, prosperous, and provisional. And I know provided for and provisional sound the same, but they're not. Her household is prepared, provided for, prosperous, and provisional. It says here in verse 21, she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is clothed with scarlet. She is not afraid of snow. The household is prepared due to this woman's effort. Verse 22, she makes tapestry for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. I see this, that it's sort of an inward provision of her household, how she provides for her household and for herself. And then verse 23, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about this verse because it's got a very important dynamic in it. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits behind the elders of the land. I cannot escape the fact that this verse contextually is essentially conveying that idea. I don't know if you've ever heard that old quote, behind every good man is a great woman or is a good woman. It's true, though. And there is this truth here that it's conveyed in this verse. Her husband is known in the gates because of her. That's the idea. That's the context. It's because of the life that she lives and the way that she takes care of her household and who she is. That is a large part of the reason that her husband is known in the gates. And I think there's some truth, some credibility to that old saying that behind every good man is a good woman or an amazing woman. And there's an interesting truth to this, though, too. Married men do better in business. Married men are happier, they live longer, but they also, interestingly enough, they excel further in business than unmarried men. Now, why? Now, this is a plain fact. I don't have the statistics for you. You can Google them for yourselves. I'm not going to bore you with statistics that you can easily Google for yourself in a matter of minutes. But married men do better in business, and there are very simple reasons. I personally, by my count, I have 4 reasons. First one is purpose, second one is polish, third one is perspective, and the fourth one is proportions. Now, this is very widely understood. Married men need a cause greater than themselves. It's what takes men into battle. It's what keeps them there. It's what drives men on quests and to excel at business and all those sorts of things. Men need a cause greater than themselves. And this truth here, and this is even widely understood secularly, that one of the big reasons that married men do better in business, do better in the business world, is because they have something greater than themselves to work for. They find greater satisfaction and contentment in their job because there is this reason greater than themselves in doing it. That I'm providing for my wife, I'm providing for my family, and so that's just widely understood. Secondly, though, married men tend to, not totally. Some married men never learn. They're like the same person that got married 20 years previously. But generally speaking, married men become more polished, and this is because women, frankly, are manuals on relationships. And so a married man learns all kinds of things about relationships. Not only does he learn all kinds of things about relationships and how to relate and how to communicate, being married is almost like communication training. Like this person is in your face and you have to talk to them. And so married men, not only do you have to talk to them, you have to get along, right? And so you learn, married men typically learn to compromise. They learn how to compromise. They learn how to be genteel. They learn how to talk to a woman. And this brings an interesting point. In business, half or more than half of your clients are going to be women. Married men typically learn how to deal with women better. They learn how to communicate with women. They learn how to deal with women. And so there is a truth there. Thirdly, they gain a perspective. And this isn't so much about her femininity as it is about the fact that just living with this person, if he's not a complete moron, and he has more than 5 brain cells to his name, he has learned over the thousands and thousands of times that they have had confrontations or disagreements or friction to hopefully begin to look at a point of conflict from the other person's point of view. Because he loves this person, he typically, the married man, learns to look at conflict and problems from her point of view. Love will drive him to do that. Love has driven me to do that countless times in our marriage, to, when there's a conflict, to look at, to attempt to view this breakdown, this problem, from the other person's perspective, to view it from Alicia's perspective. This has helped me in business. It's helped me in out in the world to look at conflicts I have with other people, even though I'm not doing it out of love, but I've learned over time in conflict resolution in my marriage that it makes a big difference if I look at it from the other person's perspective. And then fourthly, proportions. And I already kind of bled into this one. Proportionately, half of the people that a man is going to encounter out in the world, in the business world, are women, and so he has learned to deal with them. But her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. And there's this truth that it's not the same. It's kind of two sides of the coin I'm sharing there. There is the natural truth that he just learns those things, being a married man. But there is this truth that I first stated, that he's known because of her. It's not just because he's learned a lot of things having been married to her. It's largely he's known because there's something special about her, as there is something special about this woman. And that is very much the idea that's being conveyed here. Verse 24, she makes linen garments and sells them and supplies sashes for the merchants. In studying this, there's this word for sashes. This apparently was something that like wealthy people and pretty much royalty generally wore. And so there's this idea here that she's making not just nice things, but things for royalty, and she's really good at it. But this idea that she's provisional, that she's not just providing for the future of her household, she's not just preparing for the future, she's not just providing for her household, she's not just helping her household and her husband to become prosperous through her greatness and how amazing she is, but she also provides and is provisional on the outside, and she's actually bringing in money by making things and sending them out. So verses 25 through 27, we're going to see her character. We're going to see her character. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom. On her tongue is the law of kindness. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her character. I see here she's honorable, she's hopeful, she's helpful. She's like a hawk with her family, watching her family like a hawk, and she's hardworking. I want to spend a little bit of time in particular talking about the word strength and honor there. This is an internal strength. It's not the strength that's being mentioned in the verses previously where she's strengthening her arms. The context of this idea here is in the context of honor, and that's a character trait. So the strength it's talking about here, it seems to be conveying the idea that it's an internal strength. Now again, I want to reiterate to you ladies, as you are growing up, some of you are married, some of you will be married soon, and some of you will be married at some point, maybe later. I don't know if everybody even wants to be married, but most of you in here moving in that direction, I want to say, in marriage, one of the greatest blessings that I have found as a husband, unexpectedly, one of the most important dynamics in my marriage that I happened upon unexpectedly, happened as I started talking to some of my married friends and people that maybe we've counseled with, and I started to see how many men were having issues in their own heart and were struggling because their wives were struggling, because the wife lacked a sort of internal fortitude, that there was not this strength in her heart. And I want to encourage you ladies, it's not the crux of the matter in marriage, it's not the most important thing, but I do want to say this, that in my marriage, Alicia's internal strength has been one of the greatest blessings that she has brought to the table in our marriage. I can't tell you how freeing it is that she is not governed by fear. And there are a lot of women that are. There are a lot of Christian women that are on drugs because they cannot literally, I've talked to some of them and read the statistics, and Alicia talks to them on the phone when they call in for medical insurance, and they tell her the drugs that they're on, and it's like tons of these Christian women are on, antidepressants, maybe some of them necessarily, but tons of them are really on antidepressants or on drugs like that because they can't control their fears, because they are completely governed by fear. Now, this isn't just women, this is men. There are a lot of men that cannot control their fears. They cannot control their thought life, and they are governed by, riddled with fear. In our marriage, it has been such a blessing to me that oftentimes I've found when my strength is fading, my internal fortitude is fading, and I'm letting fear get the better of me, that it's Alicia that comes alongside me, and her strength, honestly, a lot of times it's not even so much exactly what she's saying, it's that the things, the encouragement she's giving me are coming from a heart of strength. You know, it's almost like if you're running a race, like say a really hard race, like a what are the Reebok ones?
Spartan race.
So, like you're running a Spartan race. It doesn't mean a whole lot if someone runs up to you and says you've got what it takes if they didn't finish the race, you know. But if they've finished 5 races and they've been watching you and they're like, dude, you got what it takes, that's saying something, because there's a strength behind it, there's an accomplishment behind it. And when Alicia, when she shares an encouraging word with me, but it comes from a heart of strength where she is trusting the Lord, it has brought incredible encouragement and strength to me. This isn't meant to be a burden. This isn't meant to be some like, oh my gosh, how can I ever... This is just meant to be an encouragement. In my marriage, looking back over the last 10 years, one of the most wonderful things that my wife has repeatedly brought to the table in our marriage is strength. Not physical strength, though she's got some serious pipes, so she carries around those 30 and 40 pounders nowadays. She actually probably could beat me in a... Well, I carry them around too, but she... I don't know if you've ever seen her biceps, but she's like... Anyway. She...
Where's the gun show, man?
Sorry, you probably don't want to show them off. Yeah. Dude, she's like lifting 30-pound dumbbells all day. Not dumbbells. Anyways. Not that type of strength, but the internal strength. Man, what a blessing. I look back at my marriage, and one of my favorite things about it is how I've never been unnecessarily burdened by Alicia's weakness, by her being riddled with fear or depression or doubting or discouragement. I'm pretty sure it's not just her personality type. I'm pretty sure, having known her and knowing at least most of, if not all of, the internal workings of her heart, that it's not that she's never attacked by the enemy. It's not that there are never fiery darts. It's not that those things don't come in. It's that she doesn't give them residence in her heart. She has learned, and she would share this with you, I think she actually did, to take every thought captive, to not let some thoughts, you don't think about that. You don't go down that road with that thought. Like that truth that we've actually talked about recently, you can't stop a bird from flying over your head, but you can stop it from making a nest on your head. And that idea is so true in spiritual life. There are a lot of ladies with a lot of bird nests in their head because they've let really destructive thought processes, darts from the enemy, take up residence in their heart, and they are just really governed by fear and weakness and doubts. And it really... it affects their children, and it really affects their marriage. And I'm not saying this is the crux of the matter. It's just been a blessing for me. Strength and honor. Honor is a really cool word. I don't know if you've ever thought about defining honor. There are definitions for it. It's obviously like renown. That's an idea of honor. But what is honor? Not just the idea of honoring somebody, because that's what renown is. When you give someone a medal, you're honoring them. That's very obvious what that means. But what does honor mean? It actually means a lot of things, and it's really kind of... It's not that it's impossible to define, it's that it's easiest to define by giving examples. And so I want to give 4 really quick examples of women who were incredibly honorable, and each of these women kind of gives a different facet of what honor is. With Esther, I see that doing what's right, no matter what the consequences are, is one of the aspects of honor. Doing what's right, no matter what the consequences are. We understand that very readily when a soldier goes into the fray into the spray of bullets, doing what's right to defend people or protect people or liberate people, no matter what the consequences. And we go, it rings true in our hearts. That's honor. That's honor. I'm not talking about the medal being put on, the idea of what renown being glorified for something. I'm talking about honor, the actual tangible thing that rings true in each of us when we see it, but can be hard to define. Doing what's right, no matter what the consequences. You guys know the story of Esther, I'm sure. You know that she was picked to be queen by King Ahasuerus, and that Haman, one of his right-hand men, really had it in for the Jews and wanted to destroy them, and in particular hated her uncle, Mordecai, and that he tricked Ahasuerus into signing a decree that basically made it legal on a certain day to massacre the Jews throughout the kingdom. And so Mordecai told Esther, and Esther's like, I don't know, and you guys know how she went back and forth. But then she finally came to the point where she said, if I perish, I perish. I'm going to go before him, and I'm going to plead my case. And so she did what was right, no matter what the consequences were. It could have cost her her life. Secondly, I see Abigail, the beautiful, intelligent wife of Nabal the fool, how keeping your vows, no matter how painful, this is honor. One of the things that rings so true in the story of Abigail is that even though her husband was a complete buffoon, and that his name meant fool, and when she approached David, I'll give the story a second if you don't know it, that she said his name means fool, and he is a fool. And he was a fool, but she honored him and protected him nonetheless. When she could have said, hey, here's my chance to let stud muffin King David kill my husband and then make eyes at him. I could end up in his harem or something. No, this woman had honor, and you guys know the story. I'm sure you know how it turns out. But for those of you maybe who don't know the story, King David, who was not yet king, actually, he had been coronated, sort of. He had been anointed king, not coronated. Now he was being chased by Saul, and he was gaining the mighty men. And at this point, he probably had 600 to 800 men who were following him in the wilderness. And while they were there in the wilderness, they became kind of the protectors of the region that they were living in. Instead of just ripping the people off and stealing from them, they actually protected those people from the Philistine raiders. And there was a point where they were low on supplies, and some of David's guys said, hey, we should go ask Nabal. He's got thousands of sheep. All this, he's got plenty of supplies. Maybe he can spare some. After all, we've been protecting him by our presence and actually by our fighting, and he's prospered because of our protection. Maybe we'll just ask him. And Nabal told him, yeah, you guys can get lost. Well, they came back. David got ticked off and said, all right, he's dead meat, and took off with his sword on to go kill him. Abigail finds out from the servants, and you know that she prepares all the raisin cakes, all the stuff, and she comes and she bows down before David. She doesn't make eyes at him. She makes provision. She provides, and she attempts to make reconciliation. She says, my husband's a fool, but please don't get blood on your hands. You're going to be the king of Israel, and you shouldn't have innocent blood on your hands. Don't do this thing. And she was wise and honorable, but she kept her vows. The thing that's most impressive to me is that she kept her vows to her foolish husband. Do you see that this was a way of escape for her? She could have just let David kill him because he was a moron. Keeping your vows no matter how painful. Another part of honor, we see it in wartime, we see it in the book of Ruth. Sticking with people even when there's nothing to be gained from them. Do you know people that only use other people? I don't think anybody in here is one of those people, but I've known people like that they're there for you as long as they're getting something from you. Maybe you're cool and they need you, or maybe there's something to be gained monetarily, or maybe you're a lot of fun, maybe you have a lot of access to fun things, whatever, and they're there as long as you need them. I love this about Ruth, that Naomi had nothing. She not only did she had nothing, she apparently was a bit of a butt nugget. Sorry, that's what I call one of my kids. Sorry. Because think about the fact that she was just about to rename herself Bitterness, and she's like, "Don't call me Naomi," which means pleasant anymore. Call me Bitterness. So Ruth stuck with her though. Ruth stuck with her because she saw obviously the godliness in her life. She had become a believer in Jehovah through Ruth's life and through her family. But through Naomi's family. But Ruth, I love that about her, that she was determined to stay with Naomi. And this is honor. Sticking with someone, even when they have nothing left to give you. When there's no good reason to do it. You have nothing to gain out of it. Actually, maybe you have a lot to lose by staying with that person. She was going to leave her family, leave her country, go into a country where they didn't like Moabites. There weren't a whole lot of nice things written in the scriptures about Moabites, actually. And she was going to follow her into this land when she had nothing to give her. Sticking with people even when there's nothing to gain, that's honor. Sticking with your friends even when things turn sour for them and maybe they let it sink into their heart and they're sour now. Are you one of those people that leaves people when it gets like that? Because Ruth didn't, interestingly enough. She stuck with her even when there was nothing left to gain, and even though it would mean taking a loss. Interestingly enough, J.B. Phillips made a point about this, that the words virtuous woman, who can find a virtuous wife, the only woman in the Old Testament that those words are used of Ruth. Fourthly here, the fourth facet of honor that I see through one of these godly women that we've been blessed to get to know through the scriptures is through Mary, Jesus' earthly mother, Mary. And this is the part of honor that obviously I think anybody would know and is readily said. It's doing what's right or godly living even when no one's looking. And you have to think that now we all know who Mary is, and we knew who Mary was, but until that first time that Gabriel spoke to her, she was living a quiet, anonymous, godly life. And God saw, but that was honor. That is honor. Doing what is right, being godly even when no one is looking. Well, this woman here in Proverbs 31, strength and honor are her clothing. She's clothed with those things. She shall rejoice in time to come. And this is a promise for guys and girls. If you make strength, internal strength, and honor your clothing, your life will only get better. Now, I don't mean the physical circumstances of it. That, in some ways, hasn't really been my experience. But what I mean by that, though, is that in your heart, your quality of life will get better. We have that promise. It's in Proverbs 4. It says, the path of the righteous is like the first light of day that gets ever brighter to the full light of day. We have that promise. That promise is elaborated upon in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, that we have this hope, that those who walk in the light, your path gets brighter and brighter and better and stronger. And this is kind of a conveyance of that same truth here. When strength and honor are your clothing, guys and girls, you will rejoice in the future and time to come. You may have less money in the future. Your body may not work as well in the future. There may be problems in the future, but I promise you this, you will have learned to rejoice in those things because you will have more of eternity and more of the kingdom of heaven tangibly existent in your life. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the law of kindness. She's helpful with her words. She opens her mouth with wisdom, real wisdom, weightiness, words that actually help, words that actually build up and give you strength to move on. And on her tongue is the law of kindness. I don't want to get political, but there are a lot of nasty women out there today, and they revel in it, and it's a shame. Very sad. Very sad in this pursuit of masculinity. A lot of women are not being women anymore, and it's a shame. Ladies, on your tongue, guys, kindness is not a feminine thing in the scriptures. It's a fruit of the Spirit. We should all be manifesting it. You know, there's sort of that thing going on right now in our culture where it's kind of been thrown to the wayside by a lot of women, and it's a shame. Verse 27, she watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She's watchful. She's watchful. This is a godly character. I've shared that with you guys. Part of being a pastor, I believe, is being watchful. We are here to love you and to serve you and attempt to give direction and clarity spiritually moving forward, and provide. Obviously, a shepherd provides for the sheep, but a shepherd has two staffs. He has a staff to bring the sheep in, but he also has a staff for protection. And in the same way, a godly family, the mother is watchful over the ways of her household, and does not eat the bread of idleness. I think this is an important point to make one reminder of one of the most repeated truths of the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs, maybe more than any other truth, tells you over and over and over and over again to mind your ways. To mind your ways. See, because life is a lot like a path, like a trail that you are walking on. And there's an earlier section of the book of Proverbs, I believe it's around chapter 5, where it tells you to ponder the path of your feet. Why? Because a path leads somewhere. And the path, the terminus, the end point of the path may not be obvious. It may not be something that you like to think about. But we do have to understand, the book of Proverbs reminds us over and over again of this truth, that all of us are on paths. Your life isn't static where you're just sitting in a spot doing nothing. You may be not moving, but you are on a path. And that path goes somewhere. And the book of Proverbs over and over again says, hey, stop for a minute where you are in your life and think about where the path that you are on is taking you. And I think that's an appropriate and important reminder here at this point at the end of the book of Proverbs of one of the most important, I think, truths of the book of Proverbs, is that she watches over the ways. The ways. This idea of the ways is like the pathways of her household. She watches over, when she looks at her children, she doesn't just look at their actions. She looks at their heart. She looks at their decisions, and she looks at the path that they're on, and she looks at where that path is taking them. And this godly woman is wise, and she understands where pathways go and what the end point of certain pathways are. And does not eat the bread of idleness. Verses 28 through 31, her glory. 28 through 31, we're going to see her glory. We're going to see her praised by 4 different people, 4 different groups. She's going to be praised by her children, by her husband, by the Lord, and by the gate, or by society. Verse 28, her children rise up and call her blessed. If you want a verse to write in the bottom of Mother's Day cards, it would be that. You can borrow my verse that I write in the bottom of my Mother's Day cards. Write Proverbs 31:28. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Her husband also praises her. Many daughters have done well, but you excel them all. Verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. I'll come back and briefly comment on 30 in a moment, just because it's kind of an aside here from the overarching thing. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And this is this idea that she will be praised for her godliness, and that she's receiving the fruits of her godliness, and that being praised by man and or by God, but because she has lived godly and God's approval is upon her. But a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. Verse 31, give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. And again, this is that conveyance of that idea, the gates, that her husband is known in the gates. This is essentially, the gates are the societal center, the place of judicial judgment, but the place of, they made all kinds of judgment there. The gates were the societal center, is the idea there. Let her own works praise her in the gates. And just ending here, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. This comment in verse 30, remember, this is actually more aimed at guys, this comment, because the passage is actually being spoken to men. It's not really actually being spoken to women. I know a lot of women, as we talked about earlier, you get bummed out. You're like, oh, it's the ideal woman. Well, that's really not the heart of it. It's really spoken to a young man who's not married about what the ideal woman looks like. And it says here, there's a warning here, that charm is deceitful and beauty is passing. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys and or girls that God wants you to marry someone that you're completely unattracted to. That's not the God I know. I don't see him doing that. I've known people who thought he was like that. There was a couple at Bible college that they literally told everybody, I'm not attracted to Joe. And Joe was like, I'm not attracted to Susie, but God has called us to get married, and we're getting married. And all the rest of us are going, oh my gosh, that's just stupid. That's not the God that I know. You want a verse to back that up? I would say this, that when he planted the trees in the garden, he planted trees that not only were good to eat, but were also beautiful to look at. He's not completely unconcerned with your natural appreciation for beauty. That being said, I have often known a lot of godly young people who married baboons because they were attractive, or who were interested. I should say, I've seen a lot of godly young people who were extremely interested in stupid people. I'm thinking of one girl in particular. You guys could probably possibly know her, so I have to be really vague. Well, actually, I'm thinking of a guy too. Be careful of the overemphasis on beauty. I don't believe for a second that God would make you marry someone that you are physically unattracted to, or that would be his will for your life. But I have known godly young people that have made a mess of or caused unnecessary pain in their heart and in their life because there was an overemphasis on beauty. And beauty's passing. Physical beauty fades. And that's a reality now that I'm getting older. Alicia's not getting older, but now that I'm getting older, and I'll be 40 in a few years, it's kind of dawning on me that there's going to come a day when Alicia and I are over 60 and over 70. And there's this reality that as we grow older, to be honest, what my wife looks like means less and less to me. And it's not to say she's not beautiful. She's still as beautiful as the day that we got married. But the interesting thing is I find myself less and less concerned about it, and less thoughtful of it. And I think about when I think of that, I think about some of the young people that are a little bit, so they understand, as we've talked about, that there are those three things you guys look for. I'm sure you've probably all heard the course in teaching, or you've heard my variation of the course in teaching about looking for body, soul, and spirit, that connection there. The thing that I found weird about it, though, is that I've taught that because I believe it's true, that you'll know that person is bone of your bone and flesh of your flesh. You'll know that they're the one you'll almost know for certain that they're the one when you're spiritually on the same page. You are great friends and you are attracted to them. And so I've shared that truth numerous times. I've pointed numerous young people to that teaching, and they've listened to Corson's version of it, or they've heard my version of that teaching, and it's great. The problem is that I've often watched in the years or months that followed, some of those people become a little too focused on the physical beauty portion of it. And they're so focused, this person's going to be the most beautiful thing I've ever laid eyes on. Well, that's really quite possible, but it's not the focus. And this idea, I'm telling you, beauty is passing, and some young, godly young people, some Christians, you're too focused on it. You're obsessed with it in a way that is really unhealthy because it passes. And some people, for some situations, it passes sooner than others. But then lastly here, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain. Charm is deceitful, as one of the other things that's reiterated throughout the book of Proverbs is how the adulterous woman or women seduce the young man through their words. One of the most common themes throughout the book of Proverbs is how the seductress seduced the young men through her words. Wives, young ladies, this is a warning to you. Your husbands need your verbal affirmation, and they need a lot of it. Your future husbands, they need a lot of it. A warning, you could use this to your own destruction and to the destruction of many men, young ladies. You want to know how to win men's hearts? It's not through their stomachs. It's not through their groin. It's through their ears. It really is. The Bible does not mince words on this, and I know this section was written 4,000 years ago, but it's as true today as it was then, and this is something that even secular psychologists are becoming aware of, that ladies, it's affairs generally, sometimes they happen for sexual reasons. I'm not gonna say that they never do. Sometimes they happen for reasons along those lines, and they maybe even start out for reasons along those lines, but by and large they start out because there was an emotional infidelity first. You guys ever heard of that? That was actually, I read that in a secular article talking about emotional infidelity, where people are cheating on their spouses on Facebook and they're not having sex with anybody. They're just being emotionally and relationally unfaithful because they're taking friendships with the opposite sex beyond the bounds of propriety. And that's how affairs actually generally start. And so, girls, be careful with that. Guys, be careful of the adulterous woman. Be careful of girls of charm, of girls that, oh, you're just so great, blah, 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 whatever. They're spreading a net for your feet. That girl who is just overly charming, overly praising you, she's probably spreading a net for your feet. You need to be careful of it. So that brings us to the end of the book of Proverbs. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for your word. I thank you for the book of Proverbs. And I thank you for this look at the godly woman and the virtuous woman. As we looked at that word virtuous, it actually means valiant, the valiant woman. I pray for all of these young women here tonight that they would be valiant, Lord. I pray in Jesus' name for a work of your Spirit in their hearts to make them strong and courageous and powerful and wise, Lord. I just pray for you to give them each a measure of grace, Lord, to be that woman that you want them to be. In Jesus' name, amen.